The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
Okay, let's go.
So in 1975, my dad moved our family from the country of Iran to Warrensville Heights, Ohio, which is an east side suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. He was there to get his PhD from Case Western University, and his plan was to do a 5-year stint in the United States, and then we would head back to Iran, and he would resume his tenure as a library professor at a few universities in Tehran, which is actually the capital of Iran, and actually where I was born. Funny quick side note on this, and there's going to be a bunch of these side notes, but after moving to Los Angeles in 1997, my friends started calling me LA Ray. And now that I look back, I guess the plan was for me to be Tehran Ray instead of LA Ray, but that doesn't quite have the same ring to it. That's pretty funny. Anyway, my farthest memory back was being like 3 or 4 years old, and I remember spending that initial winter just watching Sesame Street and other TV shows, and that is literally how I learned to speak English. I'm not even kidding. I learned to speak English by watching Sesame Street, and I learned to speak Farsi because that was the language my parents taught my brother and I, and that's the language spoken in Iran. So the community that we lived in Warrensville was called Walford, and that was the street name. And for some reason, Walford was home to tons of immigrant families, as well as just a tremendous amount of diversity. From black to white to Hispanic to Asian, a few Iranians, a few folks from the Nordic countries like Iceland. We basically were a Benetton commercial or a bag of Skittles. And we all grew up and really experienced diversity before diversity was even a thing. That's funny. I hadn't thought about the Benetton brand in so long. We might have to do a deep, shallow dive on all these brands that are no longer and figure out what the heck went wrong. Kind of like Bud Light. Anyway, it's actually really cool for me that today through Facebook, I'm still in touch with a lot of these people that I knew from the Walford days. So much of who I am today, honestly, is because of that incredibly diverse playground of families that lived in my backyard. And when I say lived in my backyard, literally, they lived in the backyard. We all did, because our back doors all opened up to this U-shaped backyard that we played in from sunset to sunrise to sunset, it felt like. So from a very formative age, I grew up never even seeing color. I grew up never seeing ethnicity, never seeing religion. And what I mean is never seeing it in people. Obviously, I saw it because I was in this melting pot, which was amazing now that I think about it. All I saw was, are you nice or not? Probably more importantly, are you fun? And can we have fun together? Because we were kids. You know, at the end of the day, are you a good person or are you not a good person? That's it. That was like my criteria for judging people, not all the external things like the color of their skin or what religion they practiced or where they were from or any of that stuff. And I swear, if any of you actually know me in real life, I'd hope you'd say that exact same thing about me right now. I'd hope you say, you know what, Ray D? That is exactly who you are, because it is. I'm that same kid from Walford, that same kid who was fortunate enough to grow up with such a great foundation of diversity. Actually, you know, it's not even diversity, it's humanity. And again, this was before any of this stuff was even in our daily lives, and diversity was even a thing. I don't know, now that I think about it, I feel like Jenny from the block. Don't be fooled by the rocks that I've got. Actually, not rocks. Don't be fooled by the 2 watches that I'm wearing, which you can't see. But I am Ray D from the block. I really still am. Anyway, that's a good segue to introduce myself. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ray Doustdar, and this is episode number 1, the Maiden episode, the Maiden voyage of my new podcast called Deep Shallow Dive, where we will literally do exactly that, and we are going to take a deep, shallow dive into the complex issues that are currently taking place, but then we're also going to go back into the past and take a deep, shallow dive into things that previously happened, which honestly now, when you look at it through a different lens And quite frankly, that lens being the lens of common sense and trying to be totally objective, you can kind of see, maybe everything from the past wasn't what we were told it was. And so we'll take a deep, shallow dive into all that stuff, and we'll call a spade a spade. That's seriously my favorite expression, or one of my favorite expressions, and that is to call a spade, and that is what I intend to do. Okay, so now I'm going to mention the next few things about Iran, the country I was born in, but I'm not going to get too hung up on this right now, because I will come back for a very, very in-depth, deep, shallow dive in a later episode on Iran. But it's because of what happened in Iran coming up on 1 year now, and what took place globally in March of 2020. You know what I'm talking about. Those two global events literally changed so many things about how I think about things, and quite frankly, what I think. And most importantly, it changed my relationship with the news and the media that delivers the news to us. I can honestly say prior to 2020, I never questioned much. I really didn't. But over the past 3 years, I don't know, I've just started to intelligently question things and realize that, maybe everything that we're told is not exactly what it is. So there's nothing wrong with questioning things. Okay, but for now, let's go back to Iran for a second. And I think you'll remember that there was a young girl named Mahsa Amini who was unfortunately killed. And within what felt like days, honestly, it even felt like hours, it's like the world took notice to this uprising that was rooted in women's rights. And all of a sudden, this incredible movement called Women, Life, Freedom literally sprung up. I'm serious. To me, it felt like out of nowhere, and it took root of the entire world. There were protests in every country. There were protests all over the place. Everybody was posting things on their Facebook, their Instagram, their TikTok. And so for a solid 3 or 4 months, gosh, maybe even 6 months, it literally was the news. It was everywhere until it wasn't. It's like one day it was here, just occupying our entire time, our entire mindset. And then one day it wasn't. That kind of got me thinking, man, what the heck happened with that? I mean, seriously, I do get it. Things, movements, whatever, everything runs its course and people move on because our attention span in today's day and age is so short. And that's because of social media. And that's because of the incredible technology that we have, but our attention spans are just so much shorter these days. It's like we move from one thing to the next. That actually is going to be another DSD topic, which is the concept of immediate gratification. And actually, I think it'll be really interesting. What I plan to do is literally go through all of the major current events from 2023 as a case study, talk about how they completely enamored us. Again, until they didn't. They dominated the news cycle, the headlines, and then poof, they were gone. And all of a sudden we moved on to the next thing. Let me give you a couple examples initially, and these are going to be deep, shallow dives as well. The Titanic, the Titan submersible story. I mean, that was insane. It's like for 1 week from Sunday to Thursday, we were enamored with this situation, with this submarine. And then when it all got said and done, we found out that it had imploded that Sunday, but they strung it out until Thursday. Seriously, think about that. You've got the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell stuff. I mean, she gets convicted of sexual trafficking of women and children and gets 20 years in prison or however many years she's gotten. But to who? Did she traffic those kids to nobody? Those people to nobody? I mean, weren't we supposed to get the client list on that? Where is that? And then all of a sudden, you don't hear about it anymore. Another example is the Damar Hamlin situation, the cornerback for the Buffalo Bills. I'm going to say I'm so glad it seems like he's made a full recovery and it looks like he's playing football again. But wow, that story was the news. I mean, that was everything. Again, until it wasn't. Another example, FTX, SBF, Sam Bankman fraud. I mean, what was that all about? Obviously it's still ongoing, but again, it was a news story that just occupied all of our minds and completely, took our attention in one direction. And who knows what was taking place in that other direction. The last one I'm going to give you an example of is, the Nord Stream pipeline bombing. I mean, what ended up happening there? Who actually was responsible? I find it very hard to believe they haven't figured that out. I've already figured it out. I figured it out on day one. But it's like, what happened with that? Why is that not getting more attention still and get resolution? It's like nothing gets closure. Everything opens up. It's everything we talk about gets no closure, and we move on. It's these weekly news cycles or news stories that are here today and they're gone tomorrow or they're gone next week. It's pretty insane. I mean, really, think about that. Something happens. The news tells us it's this. We argue about it for a week, and then something else happens, and we forget what we had previously been arguing about, and it's like rinse and repeat. Let's move on. And then there's other stories that seem to have like 9 lives, and they're like old reliable when maybe there's nothing in the news cycle to occupy our attention. The best example is these UFOs. These things seem to come and go when needed to kind of fill in the gaps. And all of a sudden we're talking UFOs again for 4 days, and then we don't hear about it for 6 more months. And then we're talking UFOs again for 4 days, and then we don't hear about it for another period of time, and on and on. Seriously, it seems like life these days is going from one insane news story to the next with no closure on any of them. And so that caused me to ask the question that I finally started asking, or should I say, pay attention to something. And that was, what else is happening while we are all preoccupied or occupied and talking about, for example, the Titan submersible and why people would pay $250,000 to ride in a sardine can and go look at the Titanic? What else is going on that time, either outright or behind the scenes? I mean, obviously it's tough to find out what's going on behind the scenes when this stuff is happening. And then when you think about the Titanic, do people really know the backstory on the Titanic and how it's linked to the birth of the Federal Reserve? Yeah, that Federal Reserve, the one that keeps raising these interest rates. And by the way, the Federal Reserve is not even a true government agency. Look it up. That's true. It's a privately held corporation. I mean, that's insane if you really think about that. That, my friends, will be a DSD for another time, though. And so once again, I digress. I'll give you another example of things we talked about. It's like TikTok. We talked about TikTok for a full week, these congressional hearings and all these testimonials and these senators coming out saying this and that. And to be honest with you, I totally was against TikTok for the first couple years, and I really never tried it, never used it. But ironically, TikTok has played an incredibly integral role in me launching this podcast and, quite frankly, me doing a lot of the things I'm doing. And again, that's going to be a totally separate dive, but I'm going to go through all that. But what woke me up about TikTok was, they all of a sudden came out with this program called the Restrict Act, where they were looking to limit certain things when it comes to people's time online. And so it got me thinking like, oh my God, is TikTok a Trojan horse on this thing? Like, what is so bad about TikTok? And when I jumped in, I realized, okay, I previously thought it was a big spy machine. And honestly, maybe it still is. I don't know. Maybe it is. But I will tell you, there is a wealth of knowledge and amazing citizen journalism on topics that get no real coverage anywhere else. For example, all the stuff that was going on in Paris and in France over the summer, you couldn't hear anything about that in the mainstream. And there was a really cool little example where you typed in Paris in Instagram and it showed you these like cool pictures of the Eiffel Tower and European vacation wearing goofy beanies or whatever. And then you type in Paris in TikTok and it's like, oh my God, the streets are on fire. But it was citizen journalism in real time, people reporting about what actually was going on. So all of that stuff caused distractions. And so it got me thinking, what else is taking place while we're distracted here? Now, there's another super powerful way news stories occupy our minds. And that's when they create a distraction, but then they also create division. Distraction plus division. I'll give you some examples. I mean, racism, obviously, that's another a go-to situation. Of course, racism exists, but that's another thing that comes up when needed. A better example might be, all this LGBTQ trans stuff, and especially the stuff with Bud Light, Dylan Mulvaney, Target, all of that stuff. I've been a brand marketer or whatever you want to call it, my entire career, and I've created, multiple brands from scratch. And what those brands did, it made no sense. So what the heck caused them to do that? I mean, look at Bud Light right now. The brand is pretty much going extinct and going the way of Benetton. And so that becomes a double whammy, the division plus distraction that comes from a news story. Anyway, the point being, what else is happening while the distraction of the day, or the distraction du jour for all of my French listeners, which at the time of this recording is probably zero. But, what else is going on when the distraction of the day is happening? Seriously, just think about that. And by the way, I want to be really clear about one thing. I'm pointing all this out, meaning all of what I'm going to talk about in future episodes, and even what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm not trying to persuade you about anything. I'm not trying to, push my opinions and my views on you. All I'm trying to do is say, hey, you know what? Let's take a look at this through a different lens. Let's look at it through that lens of common sense. And instead of just accepting what we're being told is taking place, let's try and make our own decisions about what's really taking place. And then make our own decisions from there, based on how we feel. And we'll do this all initially through these deep, shallow dives, which are going to be exactly that. They're going to be deep. They're going to have substance, but they're also going to be shallow. And when I say shallow, it's more about we're going to cover these meaningful things in a manageable amount of time so you can really digest it. And we're going to dive in. It's going to be fun. I love it. Anyway, if any of the deep, shallow dives piques your curiosity or really interests you, then heck, you can dive in more and you can do your own research and you can hit me up and say, hey, Ray D, what do you think about this? Or I disagree with you here. Let's talk about it. I mean, seriously, that'll be fun. Maybe I'll start doing live segments where it's DSD with Ray D. I love that. All right, I'm going to start going by Ray D because I can't go by 3 letters. That would just be Ray. That's kind of boring. Ray D it is. Okay, so basically that situation that took place in Iran roughly a year ago, it caused me to finally not only want to better understand the backstory about Iran and my country, but it really caused me to dive into so many things that my dad was such an expert in. It's honestly such a shame for me that he's no longer with us, and it's such a shame for me in general that he's no longer with us, but especially now that I'm finally interested in all this stuff, I would love to be able to talk about all this geopolitical stuff with him, and then more importantly, all the historical stuff that took place, because he really had his finger on the pulse of it all, and such a clear lens. And I remember him explaining things to my brother and I, back when we were kids, and even young adults, to be honest with you. But I didn't care about politics. I didn't care about any of that stuff. And the research and all the knowledge that he had gained in all this was before the internet. He used to read so much. He used to listen to the radio. He used to get flyers. He used to get, newspapers, get what he could from TV. And honestly, it's insane to me how much my dad and others had to research for the data and information. We're blessed now. It's all at our fingertips on the internet, but obviously that's got a whole different issue with it, and you've got to make sure you're kind of digging and going past page 1 of Google and really getting into places that and reading things that might not be the mainstream. The cool thing about what my dad and all those people did was they were looking for information and they were trying to find the truth. Actually, you know what? It's not even about finding the truth. It's about finding their truth and what they think is the truth about what was really going on at that time. And that is exactly where I am right now. But like I said, thank God I've got the internet. I've got the access to all this information. Now it's just up to me to, do the research and then try to come to some conclusions from that. But all of that stuff that took place in Iran last year, and then the stuff that took place in March of 2020, insert dramatic pause. It was just weird. It was weird to me. I'm sorry. It was weird. It was just off, literally from day one. I remember from day one, from Flatten the Curve, it was just off. It didn't feel right. It kind of didn't pass the smell test, as they say. And for any of you that have followed my Instagram and Facebook, especially on the story side of things, you kind of know I've hinted toward this for a long time right now. And one of the best examples I remember, which is hilarious actually, is I remember on day 33 posting a image that said, "It's been 33 days since I wore a vest. This is insanity." And it felt like that. Like I hadn't worn a vest in 33 days. Oh my God. I think I was practically wearing a vest on a daily basis prior to that. And it felt like insanity to me. Since then, I've traded in the vest for suspenders, but again, I shall digress. But all of that situation from the beginning, it just felt weird. It just felt off. And maybe take a moment to think back to how you felt back then. And, maybe you thought it was weird. Maybe you didn't. But it'll be interesting to try and compare how you felt about the situation back then to how you feel about the situation now. Okay, let me take you back again to 1980 because I want to bring this full circle and us living on Walford. That was when the revolution took place. And long story short, and like I said, to be dove into at another time, but at that point, the Shah of Iran was displaced and they brought in a religious leader. And that literally ended up causing your boy Ray D, my brother, and so many Iranians who then became Iranian Americans. And it literally gave us the chance to grow up in the United States. And honestly, I never became Tehran Ray. I became LA Ray. That revolution, ironically, was something that nobody thought would last, including my dad. My dad thought that this would kind of blow over. And so we just kept on living sort of, I don't want to say day by day, but definitely month by month. And, again, at that point, I'm a kid. I don't really understand what's going on. I'm just, speaking English, eating pretzels, playing with the kids in the neighborhood, like from sunrise to sunset. And I'm having an amazing childhood. But if you think about it now, technically, I was not supposed to live my one life in the United States. I was supposed to live that life back in Iran. And so honestly, from the moment I became, kind of an adult, I've always looked back and I've always appreciated that. And I've always appreciated that opportunity. And, in the back of my mind, it was always like, oh my gosh, I hope this is never taken away from me. I hope this freedom that I have here and this life that I have here is never taken away from me because I wasn't supposed to grow up in the United States. I feel the same way about moving to California prior to the past couple of years. I'm not going to lie. But prior to, let's take it back to 2020. I remember moving to California in 1997 and up until, let's say, February 2020, I would literally wake up every day for those 25 years and I'd appreciate the weather. I mean, I could run outside every day. I could go for a walk. I'm a big believer in step count. We'll get into that later. But literally, I've appreciated the weather in California. And then all of a sudden, in March of 2020, for the first time in my life in the United States, obviously the first time in my life living in California, I didn't have the ability to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And that was weird. Like, for a guy who's appreciated living here in this country and in this state for every single day, it felt weird being told, stay in the house. It felt weird for the first time in my life to feel like I lived in a different country and feel like, quite frankly, again, it just was weird. It was off. And I remember saying to friends, this stuff just feels different. I don't know what's going on. It just doesn't make common sense. And so that weird feeling, it also made me think like, okay, gosh, maybe maybe this is like a snapshot of what life would have been like in Iran, because it probably was like that. I know it definitely probably was like that during the Iran-Iraq war, because there's a war going on. But that makes sense. You stay inside when there's a war going on. That definitely makes sense. But not when there's not, and especially not living in America. Okay, to summarize that, it was just all off to me. And honestly, now that we have hindsight, again, I'd ask you to think back over all that yourself. But maybe you'll agree that it felt off then. Maybe you'll agree that looking back, it was off. Or maybe you won't. And again, that is cool. Like, I love that. I love being able to have conversations, and we can agree, we can disagree, or better yet, we can agree to disagree if it comes to that. So one thing I will say is, at that time, let's say again, February 2020, I honestly was zero political, and I didn't care about politics. I kept up with current events for the most part, but I really didn't care about politics. The first time I ever voted was after becoming a citizen in 1994, and I voted for Bill Clinton. After that, this is funny actually, I can't remember if I voted for George W. Bush or Al Gore, and then I can't remember if I voted for W versus John Kerry. It's like those two elections, I've blanked them out, which is ironic because, again, if you've followed my Facebook or Instagram, I've definitely called a spade with two of those guys, being Bush and Kerry, and Gore is on the chopping block as well, and I'm going to delve into all three, but I'm definitely going to do a deep shallow dive on all three of those guys, and let's see if we can call a spade. By the way, speaking of calling a spade, that's going to be another smaller segment where we're not going to go as deep, and it's not going to be a full-blown DSD, but we're going to have a section that's called Call a Spade, where we'll do some funny stuff, wink, wink. Anyway, okay, getting back to voting. Okay, so voted for Bill Clinton. Can't remember if I voted for W, Kerry, Dole, who knows. And I do remember, though, in 2008 and 2012, I voted for Obama. And then in 2016, I might have to insert a drum roll for this one, because this might surprise some people, but maybe it won't. I voted for Hillary. And it's interesting recalling all this, but the most interesting part about it is, even though I was zero political, I kind of, again, this is up until 2016, where, quite frankly, I don't think America was political. But up until then, I kind of thought I was a Republican. I really did. I thought I was a Republican. And now that I look back and I'm like, why did you think you were a Republican? It was because I liked Ronald Reagan. I remember growing up liking Ronald Reagan. And that was mainly because my dad liked Ronald Reagan. And so because of that, I considered myself a Republican, But here's the hilarious thing. If you look back on all those elections, I voted Democrat the entire time. Again, I don't remember W versus Kerry, W versus Dole, but I voted for Clinton, I voted for Obama twice, and I voted for Hillary. So the elections that I remember after becoming a citizen were all Democrat, but then I considered myself a Republican. That's hilarious. That's actually hilarious. Side note on that, now that I'm using my brain and critically thinking on politics and, what I think about all these people, it's probably a little bit different, but I can honestly say, in my politically uninformed state of mind from 1994 to really 2020, I basically voted for who I thought was the better person. Seriously, that's funny. I basically voted and used the exact same criteria I used to assess people growing up on Walford as a 6-year-old immigrant to the United States. Are they nice? Are they cool? Are they fun? Maybe not the fun part. And are they a good person and a good human being? And that was the criteria I probably was subconsciously using to cast my vote, because I thought I was a Republican, but then I voted all Democrat. That's pretty insane. That's actually very funny. Oh my gosh, it's like I'm doing therapy on myself while recording this. That's funny too. Anyway, now all of a sudden, as we got into April 2020, again, it just felt more off and weirder, more weird. And I started to, I don't want to say wake up a little bit, but I started to kind of question things. And it didn't seem like this was going to end. It seemed like it just was doubling down. And never before in my life in the United States did I ever feel like, whatever agency or entity could affect my daily life. The only person that could affect my daily life was myself. But now this was affecting my daily life. It was affecting the things I can do, the places I can go, what I had to wear, what I didn't have to wear. And again, that was just weird. I'm not judging this as right or wrong. I'm saying it felt off to me and it was weird, especially because, we've had other pandemic type stuff. We've had SARS, we've had MERS, we had Zika, I remember bird flu. It's like, why is this thing causing such a different reaction? And then I was like, oh my God, this is like global reaction. This isn't even in the United States, not even just in the United States. But it hit me. It finally hit me. I was like, oh my God, we have an election coming up. That's right. November 2020, we've got an election. And so this has to be related. It really does. And the longer it's gone, the more I realize they absolutely were related. When it comes to politics, another thing that my dad would always say, and again, I believed it at the time, and I've used this so much, is that Democrats and Republicans were two heads of the same snake, meaning he basically thought they were really the same people or on the same team, but they just wear different uniforms. And that's a tough concept to grasp. I get that. It kind of is a tough concept to grasp, but it's a concept that really, if you think about it, probably was true up until a certain point, and I'll get into that in a second. That would be my de facto answer when people ask me my thoughts on politics, which honestly very few did, because like I said, I don't think politics was in the zeitgeist of this country, probably not until 2016. But that was my de facto answer. I'd basically say, I don't really care about politics. But truthfully, if I call a spade on myself, I really didn't know enough about politics to truly care or to have an informed opinion. That, my friends, has changed. I definitely know a lot now, and I definitely have an informed opinion. Okay, that's going to be a DSD. DSD is deep shallow dive, for those of you scoring at home. That's going to be the DSD of all DSDs, because honestly, the amount of time that I've spent learning all this stuff and researching is ridiculous. And this analogy of Democrats and Republicans being two heads of the same snake, I really do think that's true. And I think that started after Reagan. It started with George H.W. Bush Sr., Papa Bush, that is, in 1989. And it ended in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump and him winning. And the reason it ended with that is because he wasn't supposed to win. That was never supposed to happen. He was not supposed to win. Okay? Love him or hate him, that's neither here nor there to me, but he was not supposed to win. And that was the end of the two-headed snake. But I digress, because that, my friends, will be the deep shallow dive of all deep shallow dives. That one is going to be lit and break the internet. No, it's not going to break the internet, but I've always wanted to say something that I'm doing is going to break the internet. So there you go. No, but seriously, that's going to be my Mona Lisa of deep shallow dives, because once I lay it all out, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, whatever you are, I think you'll realize that current life that we're living in makes so much more sense based on that event that took place in 2016. Okay, so how's that anticipation? That's why you've got to subscribe. And by the way, I'll get into this more, but you can subscribe to Deep Shallow Dive wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm all over the place. I'm everywhere. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Pandora. Anywhere you listen to your podcast, just search Deep Shallow Dive and you should be able to find it. Okay, so in summary of that section, what took place starting in March of 2020, it really got me thinking. And again, we'll DSD into all that, but I will say this: if 2021 had been the election year, or 2019 had been the election year, or 2022 had been the election year, I guarantee you What happened in March of 2020 would have happened in March of 2019 or March of 2021 or March of 2022. Meaning there definitely was a connection into what has taken place and the way life has been since that, because of that election and the potential for re-election for Trump. But again, I digress. That is another time. That is another sandbox. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a second, and I'm going to talk about this because this is part of it, but honestly, this really has nothing to do with, this whole concept of deep shallow dive and launching the podcast and all that. But what I'm going to talk about is, a lot of you know that, literally a decade ago, I created a liquid vitamin called Boost, and I can't even believe that it's been a decade, but I will preface all this and say, again, what took place and what I'm going to share did not cause or impact my sudden desire to become Curious George and honestly wake up and start to take notice and dissect all these things. But there is part of it that came into play. And a lot of people had it much worse than me, and I hope those people have been able to bounce back the way I did. But most of you know, I've been laser focused on Boost Liquid Vitamins, and what started off as crushing vitamins in my kitchen, literally by 2019, had me in over 10,000 retail stores, including some of the big boys like Walmart, Rite Aid, H-E-B out of Texas, Meijer Grocers out of Michigan. And, I was hitting my stride. I really was. And obviously loving everything about it. All of a sudden, with the events of 2020, the supply chain for me, along with so many other small businesses and even larger businesses, really, came to a crashing halt. And at least in my industry, it was like that until roughly, 2022. And there's still aftershocks that are being felt. But because of all that, I ended up not being able to manufacture product. I went out of stock. And so I got discontinued in the 10,000 plus retail locations that was in. I mean, that sucked. I'm not going to even lie. It sucked. But this might be hard to believe. It didn't suck because of, losing money or the cash flow. Okay, that sucked too. Again, I pride myself on calling a spade on myself as well. That sucked too. But honestly, I had already, been established enough to be able to weather the storm. But what really sucked was I had built this incredible, efficient supply chain to get my products from point A to point 10,000 plus retailers. And that business that had started in my kitchen, it was just on stride and doing it well. It was like a LL Cool J song. By the way, get used to that because I'll be throwing out a lot of obscure references throughout, as I think 90% of my brain storage is music lyrics and quotes from movies and TV shows. Kind of like how they did on Ted Lasso. If you guys have watched Ted Lasso, season 1 and 2, not season 3. I thought season 3 was pretty predictable. But in season 1 and 2, I mean, you had to pay attention to that show because there were some very, very clever and witty things that would just get thrown out in regular dialogue. There was another show on HBO called Flight of the Conchords. They also did that. They only had one season, though, probably because it was so hard to be that clever and that witty. But once again, I digress. Okay, so to wrap on the Boost thing, yeah, it was a bummer. I've had to build that back up and take a different direction, which I have, and it's fine. I mean, I've been laser focused on the website business, growing it on Amazon, and then opening up new channels of distribution. An example being getting my hair, skin, and nails product, which is a liquid biotin, into places like Ulta Beauty, nail salons, places where people get their hair cut. So it's been cool. So business now is better than ever, and ironically on my terms now, because quite frankly, I'm controlling my distribution. So by the way, there are some things in the business world that I'm going to deep shallow dive in, because what's been incredibly cool for me in doing this podcast is I've leveraged some amazing AI technologies. And so I want to talk about all that. I'm going to talk about cryptocurrencies, especially how they relate to things like central bank digital currencies and the new FedNow program that's going to come, and really the digitization in general. Yeah, that's cool, but there's also different angles to that. these smart cities that, are starting to pop up all over the world. These are all things that we'll delve into as well. And the one I'm actually also really excited about is to show you guys how through all these AI tools and websites, I was literally able to get this podcast off the ground in what's called a 5-day sprint, meaning even though it took an immense amount of my time during those 5 days, I basically got this thing from point A to point launch using tools like ChatGPT, platforms like Wix, and then partnering with Spotify for podcasters and getting this thing going in 5 days. I mean, that's pretty insane, and that's cool. And I think I'm going to share all that with you guys. Actually, I am going to share all that with you guys. I'm going to give you the playbook because who knows, maybe you'll want to launch your own podcast, which I will totally help you with. Also, when it comes to health and wellness, again, anyone that knows me knows that health and wellness are a huge part of my life, and I'm a huge advocate and proponent of, for example, getting 10,000 steps in every day, eating right. Obviously, that's more than just, not eating carbs and things like that. There's so many other things. Intermittent fasting is a part of that. The step count, all that stuff are things I'm very passionate about. And so we'll talk about all that. That's actually also where you'll realize why I wear 2 watches and why I'm Jenny from the block with 2 watches. That's because on my right hand is my Fitbit, because I really I can't even tell you how much I believe in step count and getting out there every day and moving. So we'll definitely deep shallow dive into the health and wellness space as part of this. So in creating and planning for this initial episode, the first thing I did was I went back through my Instagram stories archive. And I mean, oh my God, I'm so glad Instagram has that feature where you can literally go back through all of your stories in the archive button and you can see everything you posted. You can even zoom out and look at it on a monthly calendar and see when you posted and all that. And I realized I started posting stuff, I'm doing air quotes again, or my thoughts / take again in air quotes, on things really starting in April of 2020. So April of 2020, and for the next 3 years, that's what I've been doing. I've just been posting stuff here and there. Definitely the pace of it is sped up over the past year. But ironically, 3 years later, when I looked at the archive in April of 2023, it was the first time I started using the moniker Deep Shallow Dive, and I started branding some of the stuff under that. So here's the reason why, and it's kind of funny. It goes back to the beginning of this. I actually started doing that because I finally got onto TikTok. And for some reason, when I went on TikTok, I don't know, I just did not want to put my real name or my image. And so the name was Deep Shallow Dive, and then the image was my Bitmoji. So 3 years in, I gave, quote unquote, my thoughts a brand name, which is Deep Shallow Dive. And I use my Bitmoji as my character, as my picture, which is pretty funny because my Bitmoji looks a lot like me. So I guess I'm not really disguising much of anything. But after that, I would go in and, I'd brand it under Deep Shallow Dive, and I would really just splice together clips. And for those of you that have seen them, told a nice story. But I never really wanted to, have my video, my face. I never even really wanted audio. I just wanted to kind of piece together clips, share my view, and then let you decide what makes sense to you. But what was cool was I got a lot of amazing DMs from my friends and messages, and, everybody just kept on encouraging me to start a podcast. And I really didn't. I didn't really have any desire to do that until I did have a desire to do that. And that's what I'm doing right now. So I wanted to be 100% honest and transparent about this progression, because I think it's cool. I didn't set out to do this originally. I basically just started doing it a little bit, started doing it a little bit more, started doing a little bit more. And now I'm at a point where I enjoy doing this, and I enjoy bringing deep shallow dives and bringing takes to you guys and being front and center with all this and seeing if it's something we agree on. And or see if it's something we disagree on, and then come to insightful conclusions together. Another thing that was really cool about, especially the past year, is I've had so many engaging and wonderful conversations with friends of mine from these stories that I've posted. And that has really motivated me to kind of take things to the next level. And what's interesting is, I'll tell you, my best conversations are with I've got two friends who they pretty much agree with nothing, or I should say they disagree with everything. And every time I post something, they'll chime in. But here's what's cool. They chime in, they tell me their thoughts. We have a very nice, cordial back and forth about it. I tell them to say hello to their wives and children. They wish me well. One of them hits me up for a discount code for Boost. I'm kidding. I'm actually not kidding. But I love that. I love that he does that. That shows we're comfortable with each other. And then that's it. We talk, we learn, we agree, we disagree, we agree to disagree. But looking at things from different perspectives and angles, that is America. And not just America. That's humanity. That's what's gotten lost. Honestly, that is what's gotten lost, especially in America. And I'll tell you, it started getting lost in 2016 when Trump won because of division and distraction, all the stuff I talked about earlier. And it definitely has been exponentially lost ever since March of 2020 because of division and distraction. Again, I'm going to say that again. Division and distraction, which has been like on full tilt since March of 2020. Okay, so here's a quick rundown of some of the upcoming DSDs that you will be able to actually see on video on YouTube and Spotify, and then listen to wherever you listen to your podcast, like I said before, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Pandora, Amazon Music. Honestly, probably anywhere you listen to podcasts, if you just search Deep Shallow Dive, you should see your boy Ray D with an orange backdrop. Orange is the new Ray D, or Ray D is the new orange. I don't know. One of those two. But you should see a picture of me, orange backdrop. It's very easy to find. That's why I went with the color orange. And so you can subscribe, and please go ahead and do that so you can be alerted to whenever these DSDs drop. Okay, let me get into some upcoming DSDs. This one blows my mind, and I've already done a little bit of a story on it on Facebook and Instagram. But the Sound of Freedom movie. I mean, I don't know how many people have actually seen it. I'm sure most people have heard about it, but this makes no sense to me. I mean, this dude has sacrificed his life to rescue kids that are being sexually trafficked. Why are we not all on the same page about this? Why is there a media spin to try to discredit this? Especially because this movie was filmed 5 years ago, before any of this stuff has happened. They called it QAnon now, but QAnon didn't even exist when this thing was filmed. So that's going to be a deep shallow dive. We're going to deep shallow dive more into Julian Assange. This dude, this is the founder of WikiLeaks, and he's been in prison since 2019. This story is nuts, and there's so much to this, but it honestly blows me away that what seems like the poster child for freedom, and especially for media and freedom of speech, is just completely been incarcerated, and nothing is being said about it. Nothing is being done about it. TikTok, good old TikTok. Okay, we've talked about that a little bit, but I'm going to really share a very deep, shallow dive on this because, like I said, prior to, earlier this year, I just thought TikTok was a massive spy machine. I had even posted stuff saying, hey, be careful with this, watch out for your kids, blah, blah, blah. And again, that all still could be true. I'm not going to say it's not. But what I will say is that when you layer other things, such as this Restrict Act, you start to question whether TikTok is being used as a Trojan horse in order for something else to get accomplished. That's another tease. You're going to have to come back and find out what I'm talking about. Here's some other topics I want to get into. And honestly, this is funny. A lot of these topics are things I don't personally understand. And so I want to dive into them so we can understand them together. But the IMF, What is the International Monetary Fund? What does it do? The World Bank. I mean, who funds the World Bank? Where do they get their money from? There's something called the BIS. This one nobody knows about, including myself up until recent. But it's the Bank of International Settlements. This is like the bank for banks. What is that thing? Who's part of that? What power do they have? We're going to DSD into the World Economic Forum. We're going to DSD into the WHO. We're going to do a deeper dive into things like what took place in Afghanistan this year, but also for 20 years. That was a 20-year war that cost like $6 trillion. Iraq, Iran. What happened to Iran? I mean, that one's insane. Ukraine. Seriously, let's look at this. Libya, Syria. And then we'll dive into people like the Shah of Iran, Saddam, Gaddafi, like all these people that we've been told one thing. And you know what? Maybe what we've been told is going to be true, but let's look at it. We'll dive into chemtrails. We'll dive into the CBDC, central bank digital currencies. You know, all this stuff that's taking place. We'll take a look at it. We've got to dive into the JFK assassination because honestly, that one, that could have been the thing that started everyone's mistrust. But especially now that his nephew, RFK Jr. is in the mix and really, shaking it up a little bit. We'll dive into that assassination and kind of take a look at that from all angles and see what we think. Seriously, the list is endless. And I'm also going to crowdsource other topics as well off our website and social media. It's all these weird and odd events over the past 3 years. And more importantly, it's the way the media portrayed them that just made me start thinking and made me start diving into the things that have taken place. Okay, so in addition to these deep, shallow dives, I'm also possibly going to do a daily segment that I'm going to call the 712. That daily 712 will launch at either 7:12 a.m. or 7:12 p.m. every day. And that one's really going to focus on the current stuff. And as I said earlier, the news story that's in the news cycle. So that's really going to, be a focus on topics that are happening real time. Lastly, I'm definitely going to do some short form content, and this will be more candid. They'll probably be 60 seconds or less. And I'm going to call a spade, because I seriously love doing that. I really do. And these are going to call a spade about certain things and certain topics, but they'll be short, bits of things that you can consume and give me your thoughts on. Oh my goodness. This initial video, which I thought was going to be like 60 seconds long, is definitely longer than 60 seconds. So that means your boy Ray D can talk. Really quick on that. I'm actually going to dedicate this first episode and honestly, the concept of this show to an extent to a very, very close friend of mine, Jackson Rahm, who unfortunately passed away suddenly earlier this year. And mainly because he would always tell me, Doustdar, you got a big mouth. And he literally said I yapped a lot and I squeaked a lot and all that. And I loved him for how much he made fun of me and especially my voice. So this is extra funny that I'm doing a podcast now. Anyway, Jackson, you are dearly missed, and this is for you. And like I said, I'm putting that big mouth to work. Okay, this has been so much fun and honestly so rewarding for me, even getting to this point where I'm filming and recording this Maiden episode. Now let's just hope my Maiden voyage and Maiden episode for Deep Shallow Dive has a happier ending than that Maiden voyage of the Titanic. Anyway, till next time, my friends, remember, always call a spade. Ray D out. Now's when I do a mic drop. Actually, no, I'm not going to do a mic drop because this is an expensive mic. It's the same one Joe Rogan uses. So no mic drop. Ray D out. I told you I'd nail that on one take. You guys want to do it again or no? We're good? All right.
This episode was brought to you by Boost Liquid Vitamins. Wake up, take your Boost, start your day. Drink your vitamins, build your immune system with Boost. Available on Boost.com.